Erika, una pregunta. ¿No hay traducción al castellano?
No hay traducción, amiga. Disculpa, no, pero
Ok.
perdón, es en inglés solamente.
Bueno, gracias. Beso.
De nada.
Okay, I think we have quite a few people. Katie, do you want us to get started?
Yeah, I think we can just get started because hopefully leave lots of time for discussion and Q&A. I just popped something into the chat. There's quite a few newer names or folks that we haven't seen for a little while on the GFAN calls. We don't have the time to go through introductions of everyone on these calls, but would just welcome you to the call and just welcome if you wanted to rename yourself to indicate what organization or country you're calling in from, or pop a little introduction into the chat. That would be lovely. No pressure, but that would be lovely if you'd like to, because it's great to see lots of different and newer names. So welcome everyone. So while it feels like it's been a gazillion years already, even though I think it's only been 2 weeks, this call, we invite colleagues from the 3 delegations to the Global Fund who are closest to GFAN's heart, the communities delegation, the developing and developed NGO delegations. And we invite them to this call to share with you a bit of a debrief from the board meeting, where they will go through some of the key issues and some of the key positions and hopefully be able to give you just a sense of some of the key sort of conversations and decisions that are coming up over the next year. Quick reflections, just from my part, because GFAN is usually invited to board meetings as an observer and also participates in the, I participate in the developed country NGO delegation as a member. It was an interesting board meeting. I think there was a lot that was going on, which I think a lot more than usual was being discussed in circles around the board meeting with lots of external partners, particularly around the global disease split discussion and decision point. But also, the strategy narrative was finalized. And I think it was Peter Sands himself in his opening comments saying, that lots of people were eager to switch focus from the strategy sort of narrative itself to the plan and implementation. I think that was true, but I also think there was still lots of discussion at this board meeting to make sure that we were sort of hitting the right notes with the narrative of the strategy, or at least hitting some more of the right notes. And then there was lots of other discussions around key performance indicators, which will now start to be developed. Some of the work that's coming up over the next year around allocation and eligibility policy reviews, as well as, obviously, maybe not as much attention as you might think to the 7th replenishment and resource mobilization, but still some good discussions and lots of points made throughout I think 2 days of formal meetings and 2 days of pre-meetings and lots of bilateral and trilateral conversations. So that's my quick sort of overview. We are working on getting a report published, and I think we're hoping to have that out by early next week. It's always helpful for us to have this call and just make sure that we're capturing, in particular, the 3 delegations that are here today's perspective. So I think we have an agenda on the next slide, but essentially the agenda is very simple. We're just going to invite actually the 3 board members from those delegations who are all with us today, starting with the communities delegation and then developing country NGO delegation and developed country NGO delegation, to share their sort of thoughts and high level sort of perspectives on that board meeting, and then invite all of you to share questions in the chat or in sort of a discussion, open discussion town hall kind of format afterwards. So Erica, if I could pass it to you first and just get your sort of thoughts, and welcome again back to yet another Global Fund board meeting debrief call with GFAN, but over to you, Erica.
Thank you, Katie. I don't know if you want me to cover in general all the agenda items that you sent to us, or just one by one and we all share, or?
Yeah, I think it's fine, Erica. I think that you guys did your work ahead of time to consult with your delegation and your broader constituency, and sharing the key points for you is really what we're looking for today.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I will concentrate in a couple of items. The first one being the strategy development process, and you know, for the communities delegation, it's been a long journey, and we've done a total of 5 webinars to consult with communities to gather input. And just before the final board meeting, we had a consultation in partnership with the Love Alliance, and we were able to give communities the last opportunity, like, look, this is the draft, and what else is missing? What is there something that needs to be changed? How happy are we? What we are looking forward to? And a lot of the things that came out, and I think a lot of many people would agree, is that the one game changer, or the most important thing that we see in this new strategy, is having people at the center, having communities at the center. While I still have my doubts that all of us around the board table understand what it means to have communities at the center, I think it's a big thing to just have it there. Now, the next steps will be crucial to define what does it actually mean to have communities at the center. You know, the indicators and the how of the implementation, including looking moving forward and with the suggestion about a direct funding stream for communities, which is crucial, particularly in challenging operating environments, in places where there's a lack of political will to support communities, in transitional countries, but highly importantly, in places or countries where communities and key populations are criminalized. So there will be no support there. And it's important that if we want to achieve the goals of ending the 3 diseases as epidemics in the world, the crucial role of communities not only has to be at the center, it has to be acknowledged, it has to be respected. And it's not only enough having people at the center, but being in leadership position and being able to take decisions and be part of that, of the game to change things at country level. So that is hugely important. I think the second aspect that the delegation welcomes very much is the mention of the use of the diplomatic voice of the Global Fund to advance issues around human rights and any legal aspects. And our hope is that it's not very limited, like a really soft push here and there, but it actually be a very heavy push and using that diplomatic voice to advance in issues that in the past we have shied away from, like criminalization, like the issues around trips, and you know, the issues around for key populations, the issues about communities participating, even at simple point like down level of having a space at CCMs. So we see this as an opportunity for a radical change, not only in how the Global Fund works, but the kind of results it will get. We're looking forward now to the you know, implementation, indicators, and how this will translate down on the floor. The other part of the board meeting that I would like to discuss is around the global disease split. I think for many of us, you know, it was really, I mean, from my part personally, it was emotionally, it was very difficult to be in those conversations. For us that have followed the board meetings for a long time, we know that these discussions, every 3 years, they will come back again. Global disease split is something that comes back again, and it is always, for some reason or the other, stopped. A lot of the reasons are highly political reasons, and there has never been that appetite to really look at science and evidence. I think in this board meeting, it's as closest as we have gotten to really look at what is the evidence in front of us and realize we are doing a huge disservice to TB, and to realize that you know, a lot of activism in communities, it happens, it's not equal, and how we must support TB community and TB activists and the TB response as a whole. what happened in the board meeting, for those that were able to be there, and it was a little strange scenario, but at the end, what was achieved is that although many of us were not happy with what was being presented, and we really would have wanted for more money to be approved for TB, we had the big decision to make between some countries that wanted less money from TB and some of us that wanted more money for TB, and just meeting halfway. I think that was crucial. But an important aspect, and in addition to the decision point that was made, is that critical role that the partners must play in presenting the evidence. So that was really important, and I think as a delegation, our hope is that with what happened in this board meeting, in 3 years' time, this will not be the same scenario anymore. We will be more prepared to make decisions around the split based on evidence rather than on political agendas. So I think I will leave it there for now and give opportunity to the other delegations to be able to share. But I just want to share, and we'll put it in the chat. The communities delegation has an open call for new members at the moment. And if you are identify as a person living with the HIV, have had or live with TB and malaria, please, you come and join us. We need you.
Thanks, Erica. That's really helpful. And I see Bruna has beat you to it and put the link to that call for new members into the chat, so which is perfect. And there's a few other links there as well in terms of accessing board documents, but then also from the webinar that Erica mentioned earlier and the summary of it. So have a look in the chat for some of those links, and we'll make sure that we include all of those when we post the recording and the notes from this call. Thank you very much again, Erica, for that summary in terms of some of that work. And I think Peter has said it in the chat, but also your intervention in particular around the global disease split at the board was particularly well placed. It was an important conversation, and it was an important perspective that needed to be brought to the conversation. And I hope you're right that we will be ready to discuss this in a more evidence-based way in the coming years ahead of the 8th replenishment. But that's just me, sorry, editorializing, friends. Carolyn Gomes is the board member for the Developing Country NGO delegation. And Carolyn, if I could pass it over to you for your comments, reflections on those comments from Erica, but also other issues that Ping was raising during the board meetings. Carolyn?
Hi, everybody, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning for those who are joining us on this call. I fully endorse Erica's comments on the things that were important and the things that we need to keep an eye on. And I want to just take the opportunity to thank Erica for her work to get that decision actually passed on the global disease split, because it was touch and go and required a lot of mediation and intervention around the board table and behind the scenes at the board table. But we did get a decision passed. And one of the things I want to just add in terms of what Erica said about that global disease split decision is that the decision that was actually passed codifies the need to have a review of the way the Global Fund allocates its money prior to the next 3-year period. So it requests the Global Fund's independent evaluation function to commission, in consultation with the strategy committee, technical partners, and secretariat, an external evaluation of the Global Fund's approach to resource allocation. And this is something that has been a challenge for many, many constituencies, particularly the two civil society and communities delegations. And we've been trying to get this whole silliness around splitting global disease split, and then you come to make a decision about catalytic funding, and you're taking piecemeal decisions rather than having a holistic look at the resource allocation methodology. So I'm very glad that this got passed. It was part of an amendment that came from one of the board members, and it means that we now have a board decision that says we will look at this before the end of the next 3 years and make a holistic decision about how the Global Fund splits its resources, which is going to be really critical in terms of how we divvy up the funds for the new strategy. We've passed this wonderful strategy. We're going into a implementation discussion over the next year to see what needs to change in how the Global Fund does its work. And is there, what systems, processes, levers, etc. need to change for us to fully realize the promise of that strategy, because it's really a big promise in that strategy. It's a promise about putting communities at the center, as Erica said. It's a promise about making people-centered, integrated systems for health that deliver impact and resilience and sustainability. It's a promise about maximizing health equity, gender equity, and human rights. These are critical commitments in that strategy. And now we have to see how the fund as a whole, both the board and the secretariat, as well as the partners and everyone else involved in implementation, how we make those commitments a reality. And so we were glad that the decision around the strategy also includes keeping the board and the strategy committee updated as to what implementation thinking, what's going to change at the Global Fund, what's the thinking, what's the decision making we have to make in terms of how we're going to deliver this new strategy differently than the last strategy. And we know we had human rights in there, but we also know that the KPIs that were developed, while they didn't measure very much, they were not terribly strong on actually measuring impact on the ground. Even the KPIs that we had, key performance indicators, showed that we weren't doing as well as we should be with human rights and gender equality. So now we have to look and see how we're going to do better and what organization. For the developing country NGO delegation, it's really important that the CRG department moves away from being a small department and becomes integral and cost-cutting across the secretariat, but also moves up in importance to the level of the MEC, which is the Management Executive Committee, because if one of your pillars is human rights and gender equality and another one is communities at the center, then the Community Rights and Gender Department needs to be sitting right at the table of the place where the management makes the decisions in the Global Fund. So that's one of the things we've been pushing for a while as a delegation, and will continue to push. Remember also that we have other pieces of this strategy, which is contributing to pandemic preparedness and response and maximizing resources. We're going into a replenishment next year, and we're going to have to find a way to, in this COVID resource constrained environment, use our resources, our talents as civil society, as GFAN, as delegations, to ensure that we are able to maximize engagement of governments, of partners, of donor governments, of implementers in finding the funding to support this strategy, and being able to be clear about what we're going to do differently, what lessons we've learned from the last strategy. So that's I want to highlight. And there's one other thing that we want to flag for people is the independent evaluation decision that was taken, where the Global Fund is changing the way it does in the evaluations of itself. So we have the Office of OIG that does audits and looks back at programming, looks at how the Secretariat organizes itself. But then there are evaluations of our programs, evaluations of specific issues like resilient and sustainable systems for health, which will now become people-centered systems for health. So we need to be able to evaluate whether or not what we want to achieve, what we're doing to achieve, what we say we want to achieve, is actually working. That was done up to this point in time by the TERG, which is the Technical Evaluation Review Group. But that's changing. And part of the reason why it's changing is because the Secretariat, there was always a tension between what the TERG found and what the Secretariat thought was a reasonable thing to find, and how they implemented the decisions, the recommendations of the TERG. Did they actually change programming? Was there learning in the Secretariat for what could be done better? So this new independent evaluation function focuses on learning for the Secretariat and for all partners, including us. But it remains independent. And so we passed this decision, which has a number of safeguards. As it's being operationalized, it has an independent evaluation panel, which will include some of the TERG members, we hope, going forward, so ensure continuity. But we'll have independent members who have no links to the Secretariat. But the evaluation is now moving into an office called the Evaluation Office, very, very creative, but will be headed by someone who answers in a dual answering role to the Strategy Committee, the Independent Evaluation Panel, and to the Office of the Executive Director. So we are going to have to keep looking to make sure that, in fact, independence is maintained, and there are a number of steps that have to go through in the next year, which is a transition year for the TERG, and work will continue to go on with that. One of the points that came quite strongly from some of the implementer governments was the need for countries to be able to evaluate how the Global Fund was operating in their countries. So the kind of principle of 360 evaluation, you evaluate and get feedback from above, below, and sideways. So that's going to be, some work's going to be done on that this year by the TERG, but it's going to be something that we're going to have to make sure that we find a way to ensure that countries' feedback on how the Global Fund is operating in country and what could be done better, and evaluations at that level actually occur and actually feed into the learning at the Secretariat, so that we can make sure that the programs, the Global Fund is funding and implementing through partners, actually are working the way we need them to work at country level, as well as at the Secretariat level, as well as at the partner level. It was a very, very packed agenda for the board meeting, lots of interesting discussions and lots of tension, which I think is almost inherent in the Global Fund model, and perhaps a good thing, because implementers don't necessarily want the same things as donors, who don't necessarily want the same things as civil society, who don't necessarily want the same things as community. But I'm very grateful for the work of Erica on getting that GDS decision passed, though it's not what we would like. We really think that we need to be strengthening, and maybe we can use the opportunity of the new strategy to attempt to strengthen the TB communities that we work with, the TB civil society communities, make sure they're involved and as active as the HIV civil society communities in managing, monitoring, designing, delivering programs to bring an end to TB, to meet the high level commitments for TB. But it was a compromise. It was about the only compromise that could pass. And so we need to be also making sure that under that, the terms of that decision, which calls for recognizing the need to increase funding for TB, calls for specific things that must be done in terms of maximizing all the levers that the Global Fund has. So we need to keep an eye on that as we go forward. But overall, I think it was a good board meeting where a lot of work got done, a lot of discussion got done, and we all at the end came to a place where we have goals, we have things that will make impact. Now we need to just keep engaged to make sure that the maximum impact is made that we want to see made. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I don't know that everybody would know that you stepped into quite a critical role at a critical time to co-chair this strategy committee over the last few months. And I don't know how much longer you have to do that for. But
I finish in May, Katie.
Oh, okay. Well,
happiness is
that's maybe still a bit longer than you might like personally, but I think we're all grateful for your work in doing that and being positioned there to work on all of these critical issues at this time. So thank you for that. And for those who weren't aware, that's something that Carolyn also does in addition to her hat within the Developing Country NGO delegation. I'm going to pass it to Robin Montgomery next from the Developed Country NGO delegation. But I just wanted to say, Carolyn, that there was so much around that evaluation office and that transition from the TURG and into this sort of new function. And I think it's really important to highlight that issue that you mentioned about countries being involved in those evaluations to make sure that lessons could be learned. And I found in reading that, despite having been around and reading TURG reports for many years and those kinds of things, that was such an important point, that the people who are the countries and the spaces where programs are being implemented be more integrated and have the ability to evaluate and learn from things that were going on, but also evaluate back upwards to the Global Fund is really critical. So that was interesting, maybe a bit processy, but it was a really interesting kind of conversation. And I hope you're right that it brings us to a better spot that we have to keep an eye on with that dual sort of reporting function, but that will bring us to a better spot in terms of maintaining independent evaluation and making it a bit more holistic. So thank you for that. Robin, I know that you are in a few different places this morning, so hoping that this is a good time for you to come in on behalf of the Developed Country NGO delegation and just share some quick reflections on the comments by Erica and Carolyn, but also the key points that our delegation were trying to make during this last board meeting and any high-level reflections you have. Robin?
Thanks, Katie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Just picking up off of your last comment there about the independent evaluation function and the voice of the implementer country groups within the evaluation function, I think is really, really important. And I'd even suggest that what I really noticed across this board meeting in particular was the extremely strong voice of implementer group country constituencies and across all of the issues that were raised. And I think this sets a really good tone as we move forward into the implementation process around the next strategy, because as we know, an enhanced or an evolved partnership model that does include a stronger voice from implementer group countries and partners is really critical in really making sure that we effectively reach the ambitious objectives that we've set before us in that strategy. I guess I just really wanted to focus on 2 or 3 issues without really duplicating what's already been said, because we fully agree with the comments and the debrief and the observations from Erica and Carolyn. Just a few additional nuances. I think, going into the discussion around the global disease split, it was really clear that there was agreement across the board table on the need to do more for TB. But it was also recognized that all constituencies were going to have to compromise, as Carolyn mentioned, recognizing that going back to the status quo of what we currently have is unacceptable. And so we were all trying to really find a way in which we could balance all of the different needs, interests, and priorities of the constituencies around the table. Important to note is that everyone agreed we need to do more for TB. So in terms of next steps, our focus really now is on getting an ambitious and successful replenishment, because the higher the number we get in terms of the next replenishment, the more is going to go to TB. The other thing we really need to focus on is ensuring that we leverage all of the different levers that Carolyn was mentioning available to the Global Fund Partnership and others, including catalytic funding, portfolio optimization, how we maximize our co-financing agreements with countries, and innovative financing mechanisms. Now, this is going to be really important in terms of not only how the Global Fund moves into its next strategy phase, but also in terms of all of the other, balancing all of the other competing priorities that our partnership has, including around the C19RM. So those are critical issues that our delegation, and I know the other two delegations on the call today, will be really watching vigilantly, and look forward to keeping everyone on today's call as updated as possible. In terms of the strategy narrative, I think a lot has already been covered by Erica and Carolyn. I just say, you know, from our delegation's perspective, it was definitely a long, very consultative process, both driven by the Secretariat, but also from our three delegations. Our delegation held multiple global as well as country level consultations all the way through the strategy development process up and beyond the partnership forums. And in the end, you know, we were very, you know, pleased to see a number of our final inputs reflected in the narrative, and the inputs of many of our friends and colleagues who are on the call today. So including a deepening focus addressing the complex social and structural drivers of the three diseases, the human rights, advancing evidence-based harm reduction approaches, breaking down barriers around criminalization, gender-based violence, gender transformative program approaches, community leadership and meaningful engagement, and community system strengthening, mental health. And so now the devil is in the details in terms of how we're going to roll those out. So in terms of the decision point and the amendment that came up for discussion and then was approved by the board, it really helps to solidify and concretize how the board was going to be engaged in actually formalizing that implementation process. And it's not saying that the board necessarily needs to micromanage, but we do know that there are important issues in terms of policies, guidances, you know, sub-strategies that need to happen where the board hasn't had adequate time during this strategy development process to really dig in and understand where the priorities and how the Global Fund is going to be achieving the strategy before us. Because as we all know, strategy development or strategic planning is as much about what we are going to do as it is about what we're not going to do. And so we really want to make sure that the Global Fund Secretariat and the partnership as a whole really has those structural changes within it, the Secretariat and its partnership model that are necessary in order to drive this change and drive this ambitious agenda forward. So a lot of that was, or all of that was included in the revised decision point. So that was really, really terrific. Some of those areas that we as a delegation really focused on as not having enough time within the strategy development process to really dig in as a board was really around some of those cross-cutting issues that include like private sector engagement in health service delivery, digital health transformation, the next gen market shaping strategy, and of course around pandemic preparedness and response. And understanding as a board, at what point are we going to have the discussion and concretize what it is exactly that the Global Fund is going to do and what it's not going to do within the elements of its current and next strategy? Because as we know, at the moment, the strategy has pandemic preparedness and response as an evolving objective. And at one point or another, we're going to have to just recognize that, you know, it can't evolve continuously. So there is additional discussion that needs to be had. We also were really adamant about the need for sub-strategies on these really critical cross-cutting issues, and that implementation strategies just doesn't cut it. We see the Global Fund as a thought leader, and the fact that this document is a landmark document in terms of global strategies and pointing all noses in global health and development in the same direction we really need to have a critical idea about what we are doing and signing up for and trying to achieve in elements like private sector engagement, digital health, PPR, market shaping, and so many others. And that having these strategies will be critical to ensuring that we have meaningful KPIs and performance-based criteria and frameworks in place. So we're working very closely with other delegations and with the Secretariat to ensure that civil society and communities are at the table during those planning discussions, and that these discussions then rise to the strategy committee as well as to the board table. The third thing and final thing would just be around resource mobilization. And I agree, just circling back to Katie, your opening comments, it was interesting that resource mobilization wasn't more of a prominent discussion point within this board meeting, albeit there were so many critical issues that were being discussed. And I think the issue of replenishment and resource mobilization was a cross-cutting talking point across this board agenda. One of the things that our delegation really wanted to emphasize was greater clarity, looking forward at the replenishment year and knowing that there are other critical replenishments that are going on simultaneously, is how the Global Fund's investment case and resource mobilization strategies are seeking coherence across those different replenishment narratives, in particular around the ACT Accelerator replenishment, and recognizing that the Global Fund has played an absolutely crucial role in the rollout of the global COVID response through its C19RM mechanism in terms of really pushing for non-vaccine related health commodities and interventions in community and health systems responses. But we want to make sure that, and recognizing that staff capacity within the Secretariat is very stretched, as it is all the way along the partnership model these days in the COVID era, that adequate resources are being allocated to ensure that the focus remains on the Global Fund's 7th replenishment for HIV, TB, and malaria. And within that, a link to the Global Fund's role within pandemic preparedness and response through the C19RM in order to protect the gains of the 3 diseases. And also to understand, the second point under that was to understand really how the Global Fund Secretariat was looking at engaging new donors. That part wasn't really clarified in the paper, but we look forward to ongoing conversations within the next couple of months, but also particularly around the next committee meetings, which will be in March. And then finally, I just end with 2 quick comments. Our delegation will be issuing a communique that will give more detail and analysis of what our key positions were at the board table. So please, we will circulate it through GFAN, of course, and through our website and through our different networks, but do please keep your eyes peeled for that. And the final thing is that we will also be launching a call for a new board member role. My term, 2-year term, is coming to an end, and I will not be leaving the delegation, but I will be stepping down from the board member role. So we are looking for some fantastic people to step into this role, and I know we have many, many, many great candidates on the call for this role on the call today. So thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Robin. So many changes. There's always regular turnover in terms of the delegations, in terms of members and leadership, but there always does seem to be some crunch points where it seems like everybody's trying to renew and redevelop. So thank you for sharing that, and we'll, obviously we'll make sure that that gets out as wide as it can, and make sure that if any questions come our way, we can redirect them to you or again to the communities delegation in terms of their look for new members. So that's great. Thank you all very much for that. Really helpful, Robin, to hear sort of reflections around the resource mobilization issue in particular, and sort of more work to be done to from a governance perspective to make sure that the focus is clear and that staff are well supported in terms of focusing on the replenishment next year, because that is critical to both making up the losses and continuing to make more gains against the 3 diseases. So I will open it up for questions to everyone here. I can see somebody has just popped something. Sergey has just popped something fairly lengthy into the chat, but also invite folks to use the raise hand function, which you can usually find on the reactions button if you've got one of the more recent versions of Zoom, or just to indicate in the chat that you have a question and would like to be able to ask it. So I'll give you all a moment to just think about your questions and find a way to raise that you'd like to speak. And I would just, again, I'll put the link back in, but I just wanted to emphasize that a number of the documents that were provided to delegations ahead of the board meeting are available on the Global Fund website right now. And in particular, there's a couple that I think you might be mostly interested in, but there's quite a lot if you want to read the general operational progress report from the OIG, it's there. But also in terms of some of the things that the delegations have been speaking about today, there is the update on resource mobilization and the action plan for the 7th replenishment. There is also sort of next steps on preparations for strategy implementation, and a separate document that updates on the M&E and KPI development sort of framework and process. So all of those documents and lots of other ones are there. So please, we'll post that link again, but please do go have a look there, and obviously we'll link to them in our report as well. So questions coming in terms of the chat. Carolyn, I can see you've responded in the chat to Sergey's question. Did you want to lead us off on a sort of an oral response to that, and just looking for anybody else that might want to raise their hand and ask a question?
Sure, Katie, and thanks, Sergey, for that. I mean, that absolutely has to be the focus of pandemic preparedness. It's not that we're doing a different stream of work. It's that we're doing the stream of work of community system strengthening, health system strengthening, resilience, people-centered approach. But it has to involve communities in it, because it's communities that are, as has been said many times before, that are the starting point and the ending point for pandemics. And one has to have one's eyes and ears there. One has to be linking with communities to make sure we are providing information that the communities are enabled to detect, to respond, to inform, and to notify. And that is how I would like to see the Global Fund do its pandemic preparedness, so that it doesn't become it cannot be a standalone pillar. It has to be part of those responses. The strength of the Global Fund is its reach to communities, its communities and civil society delegations. And we have to ensure that we make sure that that is what we understand, what we want to see, and we will see as we do pandemic preparedness. And in fact, there's a lot of learning internationally that governments that had stronger community systems for health did better in pandemics, did better at preventing, knowing, treating, responding than countries that do not engage their civil society in systems for health effectively.
Thanks, Carolyn. Robin or Erica or other members of the delegations, did you want to jump in on that point? This is obviously a point that we've tried to make fairly strongly within the ask that we've developed for the 7th replenishment that we launched earlier this week, that strengthening community-led and community-based systems is the Global Fund's essentially added value within the pandemic preparedness kind of conversation, which, which I feel reflects, sort of that question and is maybe part of the answer anyways, in terms of operationalizing that evolving objective, which, as Robin pointed out, we need to be clear. We know when we stop evolving that objective. But Robin, I see you unmuted. Did you want to jump in on that question?
Thanks, Katie. So fully agree with what's been said. And Sergey, thank you very much for that that observation, but fully agree with what we've already said and what Carolyn has just mentioned. The only other thing that I would raise here, and it's been something that our delegation has really focused on over the last 18 months or 2 years since COVID really hit, is that ensuring that, and this is part of the resilient systems for health conversation, is that whatever we do as a Global Fund partnership on pandemic preparedness and response is really focusing on building up the structures that already exist, maximizing efficiencies through the programs and the work that we do. And this also, includes around procurement systems. And so this is a very complicated conversation and would really welcome an opportunity to discuss this more, either through GFAN or offline, but really wanting to ensure that all partners are around the table and that all countries are able to use and maximize all levers to the benefit of local procurement systems and production systems, and not just the Global Fund Wombo platform or so on and so forth. So rather than duplicating, although we understand why certain things are being put in place now, really we have to, in terms of immediate responses to procurement weaknesses and quality assurance issues, we do want to make sure that we are building local capacity and that we are not replacing or duplicating systems that are already in place. Thanks.
No, that's great. People do tend to get excited about new and shiny things, and sometimes that ignores the excellent work that could be done to actually build more capacity from within existing structures. Just looking, I don't see anybody else's hand raised, and I don't see any other questions in the chat. If there is anybody who did have a question, please just feel free to unmute at this time, and we should see that and pass it over to you. I've popped a link in again to where those board meeting documents can be found. Are there any other questions, or was it just really well explained? Anybody from any of the delegations? There's a lot of members of delegations on the call today. Did you have any other comments or other issues that you wanted to raise? Please feel free to unmute as well. But if not, and not seeing anybody yet and hoping people aren't having trouble finding their mute, I think I would just sort of wrap up by saying thank you to Erica, Carolyn, and Robin for joining us today. It's always really helpful to hear these updates and to understand what some of the key sort of, I guess, points for you are, now that you've had a chance to sit back and reflect a little bit after the rush of the board meeting and all of the preparations that go into that. I think for me, because I have the privilege of sitting both within the Stop TB board, developed country and geo delegation, and the Global Funds developed country and geo delegation, one of the interesting sort of things that popped up for me, and particularly around the discussion around the global disease split, is the work around C19RM that was done by TB communities in particular. Stop TB has done a quick evaluation of sort of that work and tried to find what the learnings from TB communities and civil society engaged in that process. And for many of them who received, very small supportive sort of technical assistance type grants from the Stop TB partnership, it was the first time that TB communities and civil society had really engaged at sort of the CCM level in terms of trying to input on those C19RM proposals. And it was by no means, successful across the board, but many learnings were there in terms of just having just a little bit of support and a little bit of focus around supporting TB communities and civil society really had an impact in a number of different places in terms of what was done through that imperfect and rushed but important process to roll out funds through that C19RM. So, I do hope and I do believe that we are on a much better footing to be having evidence-based sort of conversations about the need to support and and fund work on the TB side more over the coming years, and that getting the biggest possible replenishment that we can get is going to be key to providing us that sort of baseline number through the regular allocation process through the disease split. So, and then working on all of those other levers as well. So we've got our work ahead of us for sure. There's a number of people on this call who are also involved in working in what they're calling the measurement consultations, which are over the next few months starting to develop KPIs, so the indicators of how we'll measure the strategy. And I think that we'll try to organize a call for GFANers early in January, or well, probably mid-January, where we bring some of the civil society and community reps who are sitting in different measurement consultations to share a little bit more about that process and some of the input that's being provided for those of us who are interested in that and really wanting to get a sense of how we do find the right indicators to measure progress, but also drive progress towards the things that we care about in the strategy. So it's probably enough editorializing from me, but I would just ask Carolyn, Erica, or Robin if they had any final comments that they wanted to make today before we just share a few updates, reminders, and announcements. Erica, Carolyn, or Robin, any final thoughts?
No, just to say, keep engaged. Reach out. The delegation welcomes. Reach out. Welcomes advocacy coming to it. Keep engaged. We have opportunities as we build this new strategy and we build the implementation for the new strategy. We have opportunities as we look forward to having a holistic review of the Global Fund's use of its resources, but we also have an opportunity as we look to replenish and build on the work that we've done together over these 20 years.
Thanks, Carolyn. Robin or Erica?
Erica, do you want to go first?
Well, I didn't want to add anything, but since you called my name several times. Just I think just inviting people to continue engaging, participating, particularly I'm sure many of people who are here on this call are in the measurement workshops, and from the communities delegation, some of us that are there, please be on the lookout, because we will continue having the consultations, even to input in the measurement workshop. So as we organize them, be on the lookout and input so that we can bring all your voices into those processes also.
Thanks. And I just, again, echo Carolyn and Erica on the points about engagement. We've got still a lot of work ahead of us, and really important work in terms of defining how we're going to implement and the best ways and things that need to shift and change and evolve in order that we implement to the best of our abilities the next strategy, as well as the current final chapter of this current strategy. So I'd like to thank GFAN for really providing the space and the forum for these kinds of discussions. I think our voices were really strong going into all of the board-related discussions on strategy implementation and global disease split, because of the opportunities to consult with all of our networks and all of our colleagues on today's call and beyond. So please keep your eyes posted. There is a lot of work yet to come, and we really appreciate all your input and guidance on these really critical policy and programming issues. So thanks.
Thanks, Robin. I see that there's a few things going into the chat, but I'm going to pass it back to Conte to wrap us up with a few final announcements. But just again, my thanks, Erica, Carolyn, and Robin. Thank you very much for being here and for sharing this this information. Conte, back to you.
Thanks, Katie. Before I go on with GFAN updates, because we have a couple minutes on the call. Last time during the last GFAN call, we had a few updates from partners about their plans for World AIDS Day. And Erica was stuck at the vet and missed the chance then to tell us about Gates' plans. So perhaps, Erica, do you want to quickly take the floor to cover that?
Thank you. I just shared there in the chat, there's a link, and there's a link for a webinar we are organizing on World AIDS Day. And it's something exciting, which is very much linked to communities and the inclusion of communities in CCMs at country level in decision making. So GATE and AMFER had done a work around the inclusion of trans people in the development of HIV national strategic plans. And we did a literature review of strategic plans of over 60 countries. We published a paper, a journal article, and also developed 2 guidelines, one for community, one for governments, and piloting in 5 countries at the moment. So in that, we will launch all this information in the webinar, and you can learn about what we learned. The issues are about the engagement of trans people in HIV strategic plans at country level and what civil society and governments can do. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Erika. I think that then we'll be wrapping up the call. I have 2 quick updates from GFAN perspective. The first one, let me switch the slide. The first one is that, as some of you know, because you were on the call just last Tuesday, we've just launched our GFAN Civil Society Ask. It's not a big report, it's a fairly short report, but it's an important report, an important piece of work that we spent a lot of time and energy on. It's been released in English, French, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic, and very soon will be coming in Hindi as well. So you can find the report on our website. I've put the link in the chat. We've also put out a social media kit, because of course the challenge this time around is that we can't go around and bang our drum at physical events, and so we have to do that online. So if you can help us try to make as much noise as possible around the report, it'd be great. As a reminder, or ask for the civil society, like the GFAN Civil Society ask for the 7th replenishment is $28.5 billion for the Global Fund. And it's a big number, but it's also a realistic account of how much is actually needed if we want to get back on track to end AIDS, end TB, and end malaria, and meet the SDG targets. So that's on the civil society ask. Again, go check those links. And another reminder that on the 9th of December, we'll be organizing a GFAN World Cafe. We'll have, I believe, seven presenters that will be there. It's scheduled as one of the GFAN calls, just a bit longer than usual. So we hope to see many of you there. It's going to be exciting and a bit of a different and new format. Hopefully, more interactive. We're going to try to make it feel as if we were all in the same room, even though we can't yet. I think that's it for me, and I'll be closing the call. Thank you so much to all of you for coming. Thank you very much to the members of the delegation for their presentations and their commentary on the board meeting. And yes, hopefully see you all on the next GFAN call in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your days.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, GFAN, for hosting us today.
Always.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks
you,
very much,
bye-bye.
GFAN, for the
Bye-bye.
call. Bye.